If I had one book that I could send back in time to myself when I was becoming a chess teacher and coach, it would be Chess Improvement, It's All in the Mindset by Barry Hymer and Peter Wells. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. A man of few words. On occasion, he gets them right as well, so I hope that was one of those. So thank you very much, Jeff. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much to everyone involved in issuing the invitation, which has been much appreciated. Someone who grew up in small-town South Africa, I've only been a Brit since 1983, but looking at Jack and Benson, I feel pretty old. With that time span in mind, I looked to New York, at the time of Fisher, as the Mecca, the place to be. And when Sunil kindly said, "Is there anything you want to do when you're in New York in December?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to visit the Marshall Club, pay my little pilgrimage." And within a couple of days, through his contacts, we've got a book signing organized there for tomorrow. So that's way beyond my wildest dreams. So thank you very much to everyone involved in that. A great pleasure to be talking to the theme of mindset, because it's one that's been very, very close to my heart for quite a long time. And the little tweak that Peter and I are going to give to this is going to take the form of two questions. The two questions will largely be addressed by Peter, and the wish is going to be moderating your views and thoughts. And we hope to protect the integrity of your time to do that. So the aims, generally, we're going to probe as far as we can some of the links and some of the assumed differences, at least, between chess in education and competitive chess. When two tribes work together, wonderful things can happen. And maybe we even start questioning the meaning of the term tribe in those contexts as well. And as implied earlier, I hope that we can use some of the session, at least, to integrate learnings that Peter and I have taken from our attendance throughout the day, from the very, very outset to the very last fascinating panel discussion. So this is the hope, that we will work better together. One of your former presidents, Woodrow Wilson, said that intelligence is something which needs to be created in harmony with other people, or in this case, Cardinal Newman, making a very similar thought. If we're going to arrive at an approximation to truth, it's probably going to be best worked out together. So that's the book. That is the journey that Peter and I went on some years ago. It was published in 2020. It took about 3 years to write, and there are various reasons for that. We started off with 3 authors. We ended up with 2, but we want to acknowledge the contribution of Tim, who, for complicated reasons, did not see the book through to the end, but he made a magnificent contribution to its thinking and discussion. So Tim Kett was the person who was greatly supportive in the early days. But Carol Dweck is the person who provided the architecture for the book, and it's quite clear from a number of the speakers today that the level of at least baseline knowledge of mindset theory is pretty high in the audience today. And I certainly don't intend to patronize you by going through the basics of it. But it has been my great privilege on many European tours, 3 tours with Carol Dweck, to get to know her and her thinking and her values and her, if you like, her personal beliefs underpinning the decades of work that she's done, initially here at Columbia University, but more recently at Stanford University in the field of mindset. And by the way, the person sitting on my left-hand side in the photograph is Dr. Donna Hunter, now in Toronto, but many years ago was the director of Hunter College, which I had the privilege of visiting for the first time with Peter and others last night. So there's mindset, and one of the dangers of mindset theory has been its success. In the United Kingdom in particular, there was a period about 5 to 10 years ago where its ascendancy was so total, it became almost hegemonic. And the risks of any theory which becomes so powerful and valued in many cases is it becomes diluted, or it becomes exaggerated, or we develop simplistic understandings of what it's saying. And though I don't intend to go through the detail of mindset as I've related it to the chess context, and by the way, if you want to see expanded versions of this in the chess context, it's in chapter 1 of our book. For those of you in these troubled economic times who don't actually want to buy the book, you can see it for free on our publisher's website in chapter 1, at least, where we expand a little bit on the notion of mindset. And because the distinction that she's drawn between fixed and growth is a relatively clear distinction, it does blur, if you like, some of the nuances and some of the subtleties associated with it. But I was always attracted to it because, as one of our speakers previously, I think wisely said, there are a lot of myths about mindset. Myths, for instance, that our most able students are more likely to love learning. Not necessarily so. In fact, some of our most able students are far more likely to love performing than learning. And they are very rarely synonymous. At their best, they are. But we do find generally in the academic literature that if you're passionate about learning, the performance looks after itself. But that doesn't reverse engineer. If you put all your focus on performance, it does not necessarily mean that you're going to learn. Mastery precedes performance. So one of the myths is that our more able students are going to like learning, and it leads to the second myth, that their success in any domain, in this case, let's say chess, makes them love learning even more. Not necessarily. It can make them fragile in the face of failure. So if we have what we might describe as naturally talented chess students who for the first time find themselves beaten by somebody they expect to beat, it isn't always a spur to dig in harder, work harder, find better strategies, develop a new repertoire. It may be, if you like, a spur to give up the game. Maybe I've reached my ceiling. So that initial apparent self-confidence is not always borne out by the long-term stamina. And one of my big passions, and I may get a chance to talk about this tomorrow if any of you are intending to come to the Marshall Club, is looking at this notion of praise and its limitations. The belief that praise, which we do, particularly as parents, is going to lead to a love of learning is very misplaced. I know that from personal experience. I know it from the literature, but from personal experience, I know that when our firstborn child was born 32 years ago, we believed that our job as parents was to praise whatever she did. What a wonderful motion in the right position in the diaper. Well done, Claire. And what we learned early on, when everything got praised, was that she developed an ego the size of a small planet, but she became very, very fragile. I remember once when she was about 5, she said to me, she says, "Dad, what can I be when I'm big?" And I said, "Whatever you like, love. Dream big. Reach for the stars. But whatever you want to be, you can be it." She looked for a little while, paused, and she said, "Can I be God?" Job taken. At that point, I began to feel the first stirrings that maybe we were getting things a little bit wrong in terms of that. But there's a whole bunch of other myths. The myth, for instance, that growth mindset is necessarily good morally and it's virtuous, and fixed mindset is bad. If you put it in a narrative context, growth mindset must be in Gryffindor, and fixed mindset must be in Slytherin. Lovely English phrase, well known in the psychological literature, bollocks. There is no necessary direction in terms of morality or values. I've got a personal belief that many successful serial killers have a brilliant growth mindset. It does not necessarily mean that they're good people. There's an orthogonal relationship, I believe, between morality and values and mindset. And there are very many individuals with fixed mindsets who find that it serves an adaptive purpose, which is why they developed it. So I'd be very cautious for any educator, and particularly chess educators, of assuming necessarily that growth mindset is always good. It isn't. A growth mindset can actually have a negative impact on performance if the challenge level is low. If an individual finds a task we've set them easy, there's no value in having a growth mindset. It can actually be more beneficial to have a fixed mindset. And you can see how the psychological processes start happening. We need to be quite nuanced and subtle. The language we use needs to be very careful. A lovely display I saw in Hunter College last night, the distinctions between fixed and growth mindset. You see it in many schools for whom mindset has become quite a common piece of the pedagogic architecture. And it's beautifully done, but we need to be very careful about the language we use. To assume, for instance, that words like potential are always going to be associated with a growth mindset. Potential is a very, very slippery word. Very many schools in the UK have in their mission statement, their prospectus, things like here at the Lonely Beacon of Hope Primary School, we promise to develop your child's potential. And I think to myself, what an awful promise. Develop is just about possible, but so often we help your child fulfill their potential. Well, how on earth are we going to know when we've done that? And what a disaster if we succeed. Is the child going to want to go on to middle school, to high school? No, the potential has been reached at the elementary level. No point going to secondary school. There are thoughts that we have around the language which can be slippery, which we need to reflect on. So if we are going to use words like potential, and Gary, of course, who we all defer to, quite rightly, used potential many times in his discussion, mostly, I think, really powerfully and really well, but we can use it in ways which actually serve to limit the achievement of children. And by the same token, a fixed mindset can actually be associated with achievement. There are risks with a fixed mindset, but I personally have a possibility I'd like to advance, which may not be entirely uncontroversial, that it's possible to become president with a fixed mindset. It's possible. In terms of the longer-term effect, well, that's open to discussion and we can see what happens. And I'm not necessarily talking about, very close to home. But one related myth that I'd finally just throw in over here is around the risks that we start using growth mindset and fixed mindset as an explanation for children's achievement. She didn't achieve this because she didn't have a growth mindset. We're a whisker away from blame. It is just possible that she didn't achieve something, not because she didn't have a growth mindset, but because she's the primary carer of her family. We don't know that. She lives in a room with 6 other siblings. She doesn't have the space or the resources to work. It's not necessarily a substitute. One of the people who was invoked by Jeff, I know one of his heroes, is the late sociologist Basil Bernstein. And he famously said there is danger in believing that we can use education as a substitute for society. It doesn't mean that we have to stop asking awkward questions about other aspects of our lives and our society as well. So if these are the long-term consequences, which we do know from the studies conducted, we do need to be just a little bit careful about holding those fixed mindset beliefs. And one last little thought I'll mention on this point before shortly passing over to Peter is that Carol herself has observed that there's nothing more fixed than claiming to have a growth mindset. And we must be very careful, as I have done, of being in schools where the head teacher has proudly proclaimed that she has a growth mindset community. The chances are you don't when you think you've got there. It's a process. And in fact, my good friend John Hattie has made the observation there's nothing more fixed than claiming to have a growth mindset. So we do need to be careful with some of these thoughts, but in general terms, we do find that those truths do hold true. We undervalue the power of effort when we are not concerned about improving and challenging and making things better. So what we did, Peter and I, and initially Tim at least, we conducted in-depth interviews, and I'm not saying under controlled conditions. They were mostly conducted in pubs and restaurants whilst eating and consuming way too much alcohol. But we asked a set of questions in a particular sequence, and we were very, very interested in the responses from super GMs at the time, and in large measure to the present day, they were and are the elite grandmasters represented and representing England. People like Mickey Adams, Nigel Short, Gawain Jones, Luke McShane, David Howell, Matthew Sadler, Harriet Hunt. Individuals who've achieved high levels in their chosen field of chess. And we kind of reverse engineered, rather than the baseline, what are their memories of their early days? And the set of questions we asked, we were able to group in the study we did into broad themes. And those themes picked out on aspects like intrinsic motivation and how that fueled their initial journey, and the risks to intrinsic motivation, which things like praise and external rewards can do. There are exceptions here. I loved listening to Robert Mack's description of how chips transformed the life of his young pupil. Chips are clearly an extrinsic motivator, and I suspect it's not a general rule, but there will be exceptions when these things can actually help. But intrinsic motivation is much more difficult to nurture, but it's much more powerful. The easy things that we find schools do are go for the quick and easy stickers, the smileys, the praise, the rewards. And in chess, of course, we know that the community is very often fueled and driven by monetary rewards. They can work, but as we know from a classic study in 1970s Stanford, there will be hidden costs. And the hidden costs are often to intrinsic motivation. We start doing things for the reward they bring, rather than the intrinsic joy of the game of chess and the pleasures that it brings us. The power of challenge, the power of feedback. I've already mentioned briefly that challenge is a requirement for growth mindset to be useful. In situations of low challenge, there is no particular need to maintain a growth mindset. You're comfortable with that. And how challenge and feedback need to go together. Without one, the other is far less powerful. The right kind of effort, purposeful effort, not necessarily the effort that I put into chess when I was younger. When I look back on it, it was woeful in many ways. But how these high-achieving chess players focused their effort, if you like, smartly on the right kinds of things. And coping well with failure, something which every chess player has to experience. And Peter, I know, will make the powerful case that it's a requirement, and only in certain competitive situations do we feel the pain of failure. It can be a good pain to feel if we respond to it in the right kind of way. And the power of metacognition. Matthew Sadler in particular, I think Peter would probably agree with me, was profound in some of his reflections on the metacognitive aspects, thinking about my thinking in relation to chess, and how that was at its best nurtured in his life. And the social domain. Just listening to a number of people, most recently Jack talking about chess as a social activity, I think spoke very powerfully to that. And again, last night at Hunter College, many of the team were there and acting as our guides and hosts, but when they weren't taking us on tours, they were playing chess, mostly against each other. But what was interesting was not just the chess they were playing, I wasn't really noticing that, it was the esprit de corps evident in their team. They liked each other, they were close. They were clearly friends beyond the game as well. And for a game which is often assumed to be something which is done in a silo and atomized, we underestimate at our peril the power of a community which created the Renaissance period, where we have people working with each other to a common end. And that social domain was the final and perhaps the most surprising element to emerge from our interviews. At this point, I'm going to introduce you to Grandmaster Peter Wells, who personally was a delight to work with. Peter's one of these grandmasters who's not just a very, very strong chess player and theoretician, but actually someone who has a profound interest in the world of learning well beyond the level of chess. Peter.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Barry, for those kind words. And I'd like to echo what Barry said. We're absolutely delighted to have received this invitation. It's a lovely opportunity, and I think it's been a splendid day. I hope everyone agrees with me. It's been a very fulfilling experience so far. Okay, I think I joined the conversation at the point where we ask a slightly strange-looking question, because the chess boom, which Jeff Dale already outlined a little bit earlier, presumably is a very good thing for chess. We have far, far more chess players now, particularly online. It still maybe comes to be seen how well that flows into over-the-board chess, but we certainly have a much larger community. We have opportunities for those who are producing chess content that they could not have dreamed of 10 years ago, and certainly that we didn't dream of at the time we were writing the book. So, why are we asking a question like, has our book survived what should have been a very, very positive experience? And in many ways, I'm not for a moment claiming that it hasn't been. The chess boom has been a good thing, and it still remains to be seen how well we channel that opportunity, I think. But from a mindset point of view, I think it's been complex. I mean, obviously when you're writing a book, you think about how it's likely to be received. And I think the initial reception that we got, we were pleased to see quite a lot more people referring to mindset in their discussions of chess around about the time the book appeared. And we hope that we played some role in that. But we also, then the chess world developed in very interesting ways. As I say, we couldn't have foreseen them. A mixture of COVID, as was pointed out, the Queen's Gambit, which was just such a phenomenal success, and just vast numbers of people sort of interested in chess content who hadn't been there before. And from a mindset point of view, I think it's been very interesting and somewhat mixed. I put together a few thoughts that I had on things that went together with the chess boom, kind of for better and for worse. The first, a sense that many of those who were producing content, and more to the point, those whose content was most readily received, were concentrating very much on the kind of shortcuts to success, rather than things which I think, I'm thinking back, for example, to Matan's excellent talk earlier on the steps process and really fundamental ways of making enduring chess progress. I think I would make a distinction between that kind of progress, which is still going to be there in a couple of years to come, and those who are trying to get short-term results, rating impact, looking good, basically various things which we could define broadly as fixed mindset. Could I just grab a water, Barry? Sorry, my mouth's drying up. I was playing chess on Wednesday and I flew over Thursday morning and I've been recovering from what I hope was nothing more than a cold in that time. So you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little croaky. So yeah, so that was, I got the impression, obviously there's some great content out there, but you do get the feeling, or I get the feeling sometimes, that the stuff which is rising to the top is not necessarily the stuff which is going to be good for people's chess improvement. Now, it's a tricky position we have, because it's very easy when you make that kind of case to start sounding a little bit elitist. And we were very clear, I hope we were very clear in the book. I remember Barry wrote this passage, and I think he wrote it very well. We're not, if people want to play, second thing, chess as entertainment, if people want to just play chess for fun, that's absolutely fine. But our book was focused on the role that mindset can play if you're actually trying to improve, or as a teacher, obviously, if you're trying to bring people who are interested in improvement onwards. Chess as entertainment is absolutely fine. Where I think it becomes a problem is where you do sometimes start to get a kind of narrative which pits chess as entertainment against more serious content which is perceived as elitist or a little bit too earnest, or which doesn't always make it to quite the same level of popularity. Now, chess players, as I think have already observed today, do have a little bit of a status obsession, and it usually manifests itself in terms of rating. I think I won't be paraphrasing too much if I say the English international master Bill Hartston once said something along the lines of, if a bunch of chess players walk through a revolving door, the highest rated players tend to emerge first on the other side. And that's kind of, okay, it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think this rating obsession has always been there. But again, I perceive it as having been somewhat increased in recent times. And if you look at a lot of the improvement content out there, it's very much encouraging people to, put on an extra 100 rating points rather than to master certain aspects of the game. It tends to be rating focused rather than mastery focused. Again, a tendency, I think, towards a slightly fixed mindset approach. Cheating is a very difficult subject to broach at the moment because it's become so painful for reasons I don't want to go into now, but I think it's closely related. Chess obviously has a substantial cheating problem, and the fact that we didn't cover it in the book is entirely my fault. I remember back to conversations Barry had, maybe we should discuss gamesmanship and cheating, and I had this breathtaking naivety that I didn't think it was a serious issue. And somehow it's been brought out in the last 5 years that this is something huge. But obviously, along with this, along with a big cheating problem, we also have a terrible false accusations of cheating problem. And that, I think, if you think about the way those things are pitched, is incredibly based around rating. based around very, very fixed mindset perceptions of what people of different ratings are capable of. And I think, my experience of players of 100 points difference in rating or something is that they will be very similar strength in some aspects of the game. One of the players may have better nerves, another player may have slightly better technique, one may get into time trouble. The idea that there's some kind of across-the-board massive difference between players of relatively low rating difference strikes me as just a false idea and a very fixed mindset idea. Okay, well, this is the relentless advance of engines. This was already discussed very eloquently by Garry Kasparov in his address earlier. I think he was discussing it very much from an overall point of view, and it was clear to me that he had some sympathies with Chess 960 and so forth, which is obviously one possible perspective to take. What worries me from a growth mindset point of view is that it tends to end up with conversations which pitch hard work as the villain and natural talent as the kind of antithesis. So you will say, this player is only strong because they have learnt so much in the opening phase and so on, and other players will be pitched against that as naturally talented. That I think is not just a rather fixed mindset piece of thinking, but simply false. All the chess players have worked very hard. Where the arguments for 960 or so on may have a place, you may want to say, okay, a certain type of rather mechanical work done with an engine is not particularly desirable, but work on other facets of the game, again, going back to the sort of thing Matan was talking about, a broad and very deep approach to all aspects of the game is the kind of work which I think as chess teachers we should on the whole be trying to encourage. Nonetheless, I think we need to be very wary of any narratives which are kind of pitching work against some notion of natural talent. And again, to move on a little bit faster, young stars, I have personal experience. Okay, first of all, I want to say the idea that I've put young stars in a list of potential problems for growth mindset could look very strange. My thinking is that narratives around them, again, tend to focus on the idea of natural talent and downplay the extent to which even very, very young children have usually already invested very heavily in hard work and very often in serious levels of coaching as well. We know, for example, people talk about Mozart as an opposite to this. We know, for example, how deeply immersed he was in music by the time he was producing his serious work as well. These are not, I think, serious counter-arguments against, no one is claiming that there aren't people who learn much faster than others, but the idea that some people have some natural gift and don't need to work needs to be, opposed at all stages, I think. I have my own experience with young stars. I became the Grandmaster to lose to the youngest girl ever in August, something which I'm more than happy to repeat on this stage. She's a wonderful, hard-working, talented, quick learning, every aspect you could ask for, and I could have done without the publicity, but the occasion was absolutely fine. But yeah, so I see young, talented children in chess, and it's a marvelous thing. But I think we need to be very careful that we don't create the wrong narrative around it, which would. So I want to move on to one or two things which I think, one or two areas where I think growth mindset has been very, very evident in recent years. One is the whole Indian chess school. I think it is if you listen to coaches like Ramesh, it's very clear that the whole growth mindset narrative is very prominent in their thinking, not just the work ethic. I have to be honest, the kind of exercises which you see them undertaking, the kind of attitude to deliberate practice is a little bit more rigorous than I probably would be tempted to pursue with pupils of my own. It's a very, very tough school, but the levels of motivation that they get out of the children that make them happily go down that road is deeply impressive. And it's very clear from Ramesh that it's not just about hard work, it's also about the whole. Well, he's with us on a whole number of subjects, including the beauty of reading books. And I was so glad to hear somebody talking earlier, because one thing I hope that people who've read our book got from it, we don't think there's one recipe for chess success. The recipe is focused work, deep thought about what you're doing, metacognition and so forth, but there are a whole range of ways of doing it. And another thing positively that we've learnt from the chess boom is the extent to which people can improve by playing, so long as they go back and think about how they're playing and reflect on the lessons from their games. Closer to home, I was thinking particularly of Rose Atwell. I see Rose's contributions on social media, and they impress me every single time. The two things I love about what she does: she analyzes her games publicly, win or lose, absolutely no difference between the two. She's out there discussing what's happened in either case, and she does it in a way, she understands that you don't only learn from the games that you lose. Games that you win, she also discusses the turning point. Lots of chess players discuss their losses as if there was some turning point in which natural justice was abused. She discusses her wins in exactly the same way. She understands that they could have gone otherwise. But yes, and this kind of, it's a mixture of objectivity, but just simply, I think, a wonderful desire to learn. Okay, moving quickly on because I'm conscious of the time. We asked another question, because, one moment, sorry. One thing one danger that we thought there can be from a book like ours is that a message which talks about process rather than results, which talks about learning from failure and all the things which go with growth mindset, can be perceived as somehow not aligning naturally with a competitive approach to the game. I think this is an important question for us anyway, but also I have to say a little bit backed up by a feeling that some people who are pushing chess in education are not always as keen on the competitive aspect as they might be. And I hope that we can help to convince people that we can go forward with both of these aspects. Potential clash points very quickly between growth mindset and competitiveness. When I was running the program for the leading English juniors, I was constantly being challenged by parents who felt that, well, they wanted their children to be discussing rating goals and, they were looking for rating titles. They wanted very, very measurable progress. I was much more interested in, as I say, kind of mastery of aspects of the game. And I wanted that to be the way in which they were looking for progress to be measured as well. And in the worst case scenarios, I got some feedback which said, okay, this guy's actually not very interested in the results of my child. He just wants. But I think there should be no, particularly in a game like chess, there should be no conflict between mastery and results. I think the conflict is between short-term shortcuts to results and longer-term mastery, which will bring results down the line. And that was the line which I was trying to present with sometimes greater success and sometimes less. Barry's already touched on the next point very much. Misunderstandings of Carol's work, which, well, I think Carol herself referred to coined the phrase false mindset to deal with some of the misunderstandings of her work, which, as Barry said, were very much kind of consequences of its success. The tyranny of yet. Somebody mentioned earlier the excellent idea of the excellent idea of saying that you haven't mastered something yet. And I think it is very, very valuable. What we were thinking of when we said the tyranny is, well, and I'm thinking now particularly of my own experience with my children at English primary school, and it's been a marvelous primary school in many ways. But what we found was that their understanding of growth and fixed mindset was very much that growth mindset was something that was there to encourage people who were not finding achievement easy. It was kind of there to support the strugglers. My feeling very strongly, and I think particularly for us in the chess world, is that growth mindset is probably most needed by the high achievers. I think chess is very, very useful for the high achievers just because it presents fresh challenges which they may not be getting from other subjects on occasions. I think that chess is always presenting a fresh challenge, whatever level you get to. I think all top chess players would confirm that. It always produces challenge, struggle, failure, opportunities for reflection and metacognition at all levels. So I do think it's very important, and one of the reasons that I think we looked at the elite in our book, but have a very, very strong view that those lessons are also applicable to people outside the elite, is that growth mindset is very much about the children who are finding other things relatively easy, and it's not just about people who are struggling, although I do think it's extremely valuable for both groups. Virtue signaling defeat. This is one of my favorite moments from the book, was Jonathan Rowson's discussion of what happened when he told Lev Sarkis, the wonderful role Russian Grandmaster, and Ilya Smirin, that, Russian-Israeli, I should say, and Ilya Smirin, that they asked him how he'd done one day, and he didn't want to say he'd lost. He said, "I learned." And they didn't take this too well. They basically said to him, the time for all this learning stuff, that was university. Now you're a chess professional, you need to start winning. And, okay, this presents an interesting sort of case for us, because I found myself with sympathy on either side. I mean, it's quite common now. I hear in many contexts people saying you never lose, you learn. I have two problems with this. One is, I think, as implied in the thing here, it can be a matter of virtue signaling defeat. It's almost using growth mindset as an excuse rather than as a learning opportunity. But most importantly, whether you learn from defeat or not is kind of contingent on how you handle that defeat. You need to go and think about the defeat and think about it in a highly objective way, the way Rose Atwell does, and others. And if you just take the idea that because I've lost, that is going to be some kind of lesson, I think that's a rather naive approach, which probably is not going to be ideal to making progress. Defeat is incredibly valuable opportunity. I have my own fair degree of experience with it and of trying to handle it. And I'll be the first to admit there are certain aspects of my defeats, for example, poor clock handling in a game of chess, which I haven't really managed to master over a period of 50 years. But there are plenty of other things which come from those defeats, which I have. And I do think there are several moments where in any chess player's career, where they will have dug deep and shown that those defeats are a very valuable part of their future armory. False binaries. I want to go fairly quickly on this one. And I want to be very, very clear that this is not meant as a personal attack on the person who produced the next slide. But I do think it's also very important that we nip in the bud the idea that there is something non-growth mindset about competitive chess per se. I think Barry and myself are probably reasonably convinced that chess has many, many, many benefits for education. And, you know, our book was primarily a matter of taking ideas from the education world and trying to apply them to chess improvement. But since then, we've probably thought more than we did. But Barry has always thought about this because it's part of his career. But for me, it's been a sort of experience in then taking those lessons back from chess improvement and trying to figure out what can really have an impact on education. And there is very little doubt in my mind that it is the takeaways from competitive chess, the constantly seeking challenge, the focus on learning as a tool of ultimately about the result as well, but focusing on the learning and the mastery rather than just the result. Seems to me these are the key points. And above all, I would say, above all, I think the thing which we probably took away from the book that the elite players were doing better than anything else was the reflecting on what had happened in their games, the metacognition. It was Matthew Sadler, but it was the others too. I think they were all, to some degree, experts in metacognition. And I think at all levels, if you take away from your games of chess, you don't say just, oh, I learned because I lost, but you actually go away and think about how you lost, why you lost, where you can improve. Those are things I don't think they're replaceable in any way by taking the competitive element out of chess. So I'm absolutely, I love the way fixed mindset. I love the way growth mindset has impacts on education. I love the concentration on process rather than outcomes. But I think when you turn that to chess, it's inevitably about outcomes at some point. You just need to project those outcomes a little further into the future. Okay, I think at this point I'm going to hand back to Barry, if that's okay.
Thank you, Peter. No further content, really, folk. I would like to just share our wish, and I know time is non-existent at the moment. But if our wish is for some kind of synthesis between recognizing the gifts that both chess in education and competitive chess bring to the party, I would like to advance this notion of serious play as the happy marriage, if you like, the fusion between the two. And both of those are important. If there's a feeling that competitive chess is the serious bit and play is the educational bit, I think it reduces both competitive chess and chess in education. I believe competitive chess players have a lot to learn from the values of chess in education educators, a huge amount. But I do believe as well that competitive chess brings a lot to the party, which I think would be difficult to maintain or sustain in the absence of jeopardy, which competition does bring. So I'd like, if I could, to open it to you. I remind you that that is where we started. I'm going to make the suggestion that when it comes to that distinction between fixed and growth mindsets, rather than assuming another false binary over here, that some of the qualities represented in the growth mindset are perhaps best obtained when the outcome of a game is incredibly important. Isn't just an exercise in engagement in a challenging activity. Challenge level needs to be high, and it's at its highest at those moments. But we're going to shut up. I'm just going to ask if we can take a few thoughts, a few responses. For those of you who wish to or are able to stay on, Peter and I aren't rushing away. We'd be delighted to hear your views beyond the closure of the conference. And for those of you who we might see at the Marshall Club, please collar us and challenge us in relation to our input if you wished at that time. But we'll take just a few thoughts and observations, and I invite anybody to let us know from their experience how this plays out, that, if you like, that play between competitive chess and chess in education.